Welcome to episode 2 of Maester Monthly, your favorite pseudo-monthly podcast, hosted by the moderators of the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit. Just a heads up before we get started, this podcast is spoilers extended, which means there will be spoilers for both the show Game of Thrones, all 6 seasons, and The Winds of Winter. You have been warned. I am one of your hosts, Michael, better known as Bookshelf Stud.
And I'm another one of your hosts, Glass Table Girl, aka Eliana. Last time we introduced Joe Magician as an acolyte to the Maester Monthly podcast. We are happy to say that he has graduated and made all of his chains. You're going to see that a lot of this episode is going to be about that today. And he is now a full-time Maester on Maester Monthly.
Yay! I did it!
Yay!
I'm here. Also, I'm Joe Magician, aka Matt. All of my chains are made of tinfoil of Valyrian steel. That's sort of my game. I don't care about any of the real stuff.
2 chains.
And we have... How many chains? And joining us this week, we have another one of our moderators, Mighty Isabel.
Hello, I'm Isabel, and I like to talk about the roles of women in fantasy, and I also like to complain about the show, and I'm looking forward to talking about that with you guys.
Yeah, I think we might hit on those topics. It might happen. So today, as always, we're going to talk about some of our favorite posts from the last month or so, things we liked, the hottest topics, the nicest catches, etc.
We're also going to start a new segment this week. In the Grand Edition of the Road Warrior and Thunderdome, we're going to be debuting the Unpopular Opinion Thunderdome. Lightning crashes. Put that sound effect in there. In the Thunderdome, we will present an unconventional opinion and argue it out like gladiators. Hopefully no one will die.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
And then we'll round out our hour by talking about our big topic of the day, which this month, to celebrate our first themed podcast, it's going to be the Citadel.
Yay!
Makes sense.
Fittingly enough.
Us.
Yeah.
Yes, us, but not really us, but kind of us.
To celebrate Joe getting his official chain as a host of the podcast.
I'm so happy.
Isabel and I are pretending to be young men.
One of you is named Alaris. So before we get started, last time I asked everyone who their favorite point of view character was, and obviously everyone said Quentin. But this time, I want to ask you guys, if you could live anywhere in the whole world of Ice and Fire, not just Westeros, you're free to choose anywhere, where would it be, and why would it be the Summer Isles? Matt, why don't you get us started?
The Summer Isles is really where I want to go. It's like Kokomo, where we go to get away from it all. But honestly, if we could choose anywhere in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think I would choose pre-Doom Valyria. They have literally everything. They have dragons, magic. They make cities from God knows what. It would just be a great time being a Valyrian.
Unless you were a slave.
Yeah, right.
Unless, well, I would not be a slave.
Eliana, what about you?
I guess on the flip side, I'd be the person escaping from Old Valyria. I would pick Bravos, but more of modern day Bravos, and I really only pick Bravos. I mean, it seems like it'd be cool to be just a middle-ish class person in Bravos, not too too much import so that someone's gonna try to kill you. They have all the really good seafood, and you have all these traders, and there's a lot of stuff, and mostly the seafood. I'm mostly there for the food.
Can't argue with that, really. Bravos. You got, cockles, clams, mussels, oysters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably got oysters. I'm going through an oyster phase.
It's a pretty average fantasy, though. I mean, you just sort of want to be in Seattle.
I mean, I've actually never been to Seattle, so I don't know.
You want to be in the city of Camor in Scott Lynch's Lies of Loch Mora.
A cosmopolitan seafood city?
Yeah.
Isabel, what about you? What's your location of choice?
If we're going anywhere on Taros, I'm going to base Toloro. That's one of my favorite chapters in the series. I really, really like Daenerys' first chapter of Clash of Kings. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They're safe from the Dothraki. They're too far away from Karth to get into that wizard nonsense. They've got fruit trees. They've got water and physical security and no people. There it is. That's me and a handful of my closest friends. We go out there, we're safe and secure, and the world's going to burn itself down, and there we are. We're going to have our, fig trees.
It's basically the Garden of Eden,
Right.
but in the desert. It's like Burning Man, but in the desert. Yeah.
You'll be fine. It worked for the people who lived there before.
There must be water. For there to be trees, there must, that are growing fruit, there must be water.
Yeah.
And you can find, gemstones on the ground.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Plus, I bet there's probably some, sweet ancient scrolls or something to rifle through.
I'd be like Burgess Meredith in that Twilight Zone episode. Go find their library.
Right. As for me, I think I gotta go with, it's an easy answer, but I gotta go with the Reach. It just doesn't get any better than gardens and the fruit trees and all that kind of stuff and wide open fields. I imagine it's kind of like a better version of the Midwest, basically. That was to antagonize anybody who's from the Midwest, specifically.
Shots fired.
We're taking shots now?
Hopefully by the end of this episode, we won't have anyone left who wants to listen to us.
So 1 in 4 mods would want to be in Westeros at all.
Westeros is pretty terrible. Let's just throw that out there.
Yeah.
Dorne could be okay.
Sure. Yeah, Dorne be fine.
But again, the reason I picked Dorne is for similar reasons that I picked Bravos, in that the Dornish food sounds good. I'm like, yeah, I like spicy food.
Yeah.
That's a thing. I like spices. That's a thing that I like, but...
Those Dornish peppers.
Yeah.
The Westerosi location that hopped to my mind when the question was put was Moat Cailin. But mostly for the same reasons, because it's highly defensible and there don't seem to be a lot of people there. Except maybe the neighbors are actually a little closer to the Crannogmen, and that could get interesting, right?
Right, yeah.
Hang out with the Reeds.
Yeah, so basically you're just looking for any ruined castle where nobody lives there right now.
Yes!
And just gonna set up camp in one of the towers.
That's my plan.
If the Neck becomes more kind of like New Orleans in the future, I'm down to be there.
Yeah, right.
Mardi Gras with the Crannogmen.
They could totally do it. I could see it.
That's an interesting comparison.
The phrase, they sneak in for the party and try not to get spotted. Oh, because they can wear the masks and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
I mean, they know how to throw weddings.
I'm sensing a whole sort of new subgenre of fan fiction here. Not that we endorse that sort of thing.
If we start doing fan fiction, I'm out of here and you're all banned.
All right. Anyways. I think fan fiction's okay. Anyway, so...
Banned.
Alright, so there were a lot of great posts this past month, as there always are, because it's a wonderful subreddit. Since you're our guest today, Isabel, why don't you tell us, what's one of your top posts from the last month? One of your must-reads?
I'm choosing a post by Akimble1, and it's titled, Rhaenys Should Have Lived. And this is looking at an alternate timeline where Tywin behaves like a rational person and realizes that there's potential in keeping this Targaryen heir alive, right? That Ned and Jon Arryn are able to protect her for her political value. Anyway, I'm going to just read a little piece of the post here to talk about it. Akimble1 says, being 3 at the time of her parents' death, Rhaenys could be raised to believe whatever the royal counselors wanted her to believe. Hey, your grandpa was a homicidal pyromaniac that sanctioned the kidnapping of High Lord's daughters. It hit the fan and your family died. And on the very minute chance that there were rebels fighting for her installation as claimant, they would have to deal with the full might of the North, led by Robert's best friend, the Westerlands, led by Robert's father-in-law, the Vale, led by Robert's father figure, the Riverlands, led by Ned's father-in-law, and the Stormlands, led by Robert's brother. Even if all of Dorne, all of the Reach, and all of the Iron Islands rose up in unity, which is an unthinkably generous estimation, that wouldn't be enough to win a war. And lastly, and most importantly, no one in Westeros who has a working spinal column would wage a war to put a girl on the throne who is already destined to be queen. If anything, they would seek out Viserys, since he's still alive, and move for him to take the throne. But since we already know no one would do that anyway, inside the canon, even that is a flimsy argument at best. So I really like this counterfactual. I think it's really interesting. It hooks right into Southron ambitions as part of its framework. It's a really great speculation, and it helps us point up the costs of that badass ruthlessness that we're supposed to think that Tywin is so great at. It's a big mistake, right?
Yeah.
For Tywin to have let this happen, he was putting his own family's interests ahead of the interests of the realm, and it's just right there on the surface when you look at it that way. The Too Long Didn't Read on that post is, Rhaenys Targaryen should have been kept alive to marry Robert's prospective firstborn son. This would have secured the Iron Throne unquestionably for his future line and quelled any loyalist factions in the future. Plus, make a Targaryen, Baratheon, Lannister, Martell king one day. So there you go. That's a great post. Folks should go back and find it if you missed it the first time.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you make a good point about how, like, a lot of people, when they talk about Tywin, they're like, oh, yeah, he's so pragmatic. He's so, he's so good at that kind of stuff. But, like, no. It would have made sense for Rhaenys to have lived. Like, that would have been a pragmatic thing to do, to not murder all the children.
Kind of makes me wonder why Robert was relieved, though. That was an important part of the story of Tywin killing the kids and delivering it to Robert. Was he relieved that he didn't have to do it himself? Is this something he thought he needed? This makes a lot of sense as an alternate timeline and more logical thing that was done. But then, why was it done in the first place then? Why was Robert happy about it? Why did Tywin want this to happen?
I don't think Tywin wanted it to happen per Robert's orders, because this was even before that he was part of that alliance. But people bring this up in the post. They're like, well, Robert was relieved at the death of the Targaryen children because, understandably so, someone killing like a Targaryen king, calling for the death of his best friend's father and brother, and then calling for his own head on top of him having to like fight one who took the woman that Robert thinks he loves. Yeah, he like obviously has hate for this family, but they're saying that, he'd have to get over it eventually. I mean, like, you can't just like hold that against this innocent little girl, and maybe he would have learned to get over it. The question that I think is kind of raised by this post is then, does it say that it's okay to kill baby Aegon?
Right.
I'm going to go back real quick to respond to Eliana to what you were saying about why would Robert want this, and I think it's because Robert is a completionist. He wants to make the 8. He wants to kill all the Targaryens.
This is a weird 8.
That's a good point. Yeah, right. Gotta catch them all.
I don't think this post is saying that it's fine to kill this baby boy. This is talking about the pragmatic calculations. I mean, at this point, you're already talking about these children as political assets and in the political economy. You've already done that. If we're talking about whether it was a politically stupid or a politically savvy thing to have allowed the kids to be murdered this way, you've already walked away from the moral question. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Ned is the only one who's actually thinking about it right.
Yeah, Ned's role in it would have been really interesting had they not died, because you feel like he would have argued for this kind of scenario.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think the best argument in terms of why this is a good idea is we saw this happen already during the Blackfyre rebellions. At one point, Bloodraven and the Targaryen kings captured one of the claimants and basically just held him in a tower for like 10, 15 years or something like that, and effectively stopped them from rebelling for a long time. If you know that you've already lost Viserys and Daenerys, holding Rhaenys stops them from invading, assuming they are moral people. I think that's a really good argument, even beyond trying to stop internal rebellion. You're stopping external. You're stopping another war of the Ninepenny Kings coming.
Right.
By holding her.
Right. That makes sense. That's a good comparison to the Blackfyre claimant, because yeah, that's exactly what they did. Like, no one could usurp that claimant's claim because he was still alive, so...
And it was a wildly effective plan. It worked.
Yeah.
It stopped the Blackfyres for a long time. It's strange that Tywin, who fought in the Blackfyre rebellions or at the end of them, didn't really think of this. That he was like, that was a bad plan.
Yeah, right.
But again, that's kind of who he is. He likes killing people very quickly to solve his problems.
Yeah.
Going back to the idea of how Ned would have felt about it, when you put it in that context of keeping, someone there to keep the peace, Ned did this exact same thing after the Greyjoy rebellion with Theon Greyjoy. He has it happening in real time and soon after Robert's rebellion. So obviously this was always on the table.
Oh, that's a really great point, Eliana.
Good job, me.
Way to go, Eliana.
The real TLDR is Tywin sucks, spelled S-U-X-X.
Oh my god, with spray paint on the wall of King's Landing.
So this next one that I really like, that I saw a few weeks ago, it's not necessarily about the story so much as it's more of a meta post. It's called The Power.
Oh.
Yeah. The Power of Confirmation Bias by Life of 5. So the quick summation of this is this user was reading through Bran 3 of A Dance with Dragons, and as they were going through it, they were looking for more things, more insight into the chapter of what to post on, and realized that there's this thing that you sometimes see in theories where the confirmation bias starts kicking in, where you can be like, oh, interesting, the way that this is worded can definitely relate to something else that we're seeing. Like here, the example that they use is that all of these different phrases throughout Bran's chapter corresponds with various sigils of other houses. And he brings up, he's like, what's the importance of these connections? And that someone could definitely draw connections between all these things, but that it's more of a coincidence and that this is just because you're searching for something. And I thought it was really interesting, especially in the context of Bran chapters where there's just so much there that could mean something. And I think that another user summed it up really well. And this is AOW Shadow.
Ew.
Who actually explained his username last time as meaning, I think it was like Age of Wonder,
Shadow.
Age of something, Shadow. It's a video game, I forgot. And the phrase that he uses is, that's because some people weren't searching anymore, but rather searching to find something. And I think this post does a great job of showing how that confirmation bias can play a role in theory crafting when maybe some of the ideas are tenuous, but not necessarily to undercut or discourage theory crafting.
We're pattern seeking cognitively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
right.
it's satisfying to find those patterns. And it's fun. I find it discouraging when someone mistakes how fun and satisfying it is to find a new theory or find a pattern with a license to be aggressively rude to people who want to point out, the flaws in drawing that pattern together and making particularly the conclusions they draw. But it can be fun.
Absolutely. And I think it's inevitable when dealing with this many words in a series of books. Writers have phrases they reuse when they're talking about a color or the moon or something. I mean, he talks about the moon all the time in Bran chapters. And so, of course, he's going to mention phases of the moon that happen to correspond to house sigils. But yeah, sure, you can find all the fun parallels there. But I think it says more about George R. R. Martin's writing style and about the phrases he likes to use, the way he likes to write, than it necessarily does about the plot, which isn't like the only thing that exists.
I mean, people's eyes have to be some color. Just because an eye color matches across 400 pages doesn't mean that there's story there.
I can't tell you how many times I found a Shara Dan. She's everywhere. She's just everywhere in the story. Everyone can be her.
How many? Give us a number.
5, 6? I don't know. Why are you putting me on the spot? Yeah, confirmation bias is especially bad in theory crafting when you don't recognize it yourself. I've done this myself where I wrote a post a long time ago about how I thought I had found who Craster's parents were because there were like some axes involved, and I made this conclusion that his father was this guy named Stout that was in the Night's Watch. I was looking for his father. I was trying to look for every sign there was and piece that together to come up with a theory. But when you're doing that, you're kind of missing out on a lot of things. Like this post is showing, if you look for symbols and you want to find them, you will find them literally everywhere. That is not...
Yeah.
It's not hard to do. Whereas the more rational explanation for who Craster's parents were is that we don't know.
Right.
Or they're characters that haven't showed up. And who his parents aren't necessarily important.
Mr. and Mrs. Craster.
That's something that's lost when some people write theories. Even if you find a connection, it doesn't mean it's important either. It can be very true that you find a really cool connection between two details or these symbols or these phrases, and it could just be like, oh, you found a nice catch, basically. It doesn't really do much.
Yeah, and I mean, in the defense of like that theory crafting, we have evidence in the books that sometimes things that seem small or that seem to be like a flimsy connection turns out that's real. And I mean, it's happened a couple of times, which I can see why that would cause people to think, yeah, maybe this is a thing. And also to come to the defense of Life of Fi, like they said that wasn't their intent at all. It was just something that they noticed, and they don't want it to discourage theory crafting at all.
In the words of George R. R. Martin, let 1,000 goofy theories reign, right? Like
exactly.
He actively encourages that, so nobody should be.
Oh yeah, definitely find crazy things out there.
But it's good to acknowledge your own craziness, I guess, is the lesson. Acknowledge the goofiness of the theory.
For readers who are interested in moon phases, by the way, try Googling Wuthering Heights moon phases. and start poking around because it's worked out. Like, it actually works in Wuthering Heights. There's all kinds of cool connections between the various things that are happening in the stories and using moon phases to figure out how much time passes.
Oh, nice. All right. I bet people didn't think they were going to learn something about the English literature canon by listening to Maester Monthly.
There you go.
But there you go.
If you're talking about it in terms of like the passage of time, I think that that's definitely a way that it's used in the Bran chapters too, to show Bran's been here this long, but along with just being some really great imagery. And I couldn't tell you any of them off the top of my head, but I've seen some really interesting theories before that I've liked that tie the moon phases in Bran's chapters to some sort of meaning. Unfortunately, I can't tell you any of them off the top of my head, but I liked them. And I remember, maybe...
Probably Lucifer means Lightbringer.
I can tell you that my heart remembers, even though the head does not.
So one of the posts that I really liked from this past month wasn't actually a post. It was the top comment in reply to a post. And the post was by Ragnar Greystark. Pretty sick name.
It sounds real.
Is that from the actual canon?
It could just be a George name, though.
Like a fan-made name. Yeah. Anyway, Ragnar Greystark, who asked, why was Robert's Kingsguard so bad? All these people seem pretty terrible, except the ones who sort of survived their way through Robert's Rebellion. And Black of Heronheart, who I think we talked about last time, the Duncan the Tall Award winner, popped in with the top comment, which is expected, because he knows a ton about the Kingsguard. But he had this great, short, 3-paragraph answer that laid out, here's what George R. Martin has said about this, here's a breakdown of how good and bad these knights are. It's just a nice little overview, a great response to a comment, and informative, I think, for someone who's like just sort of casually browsing the subreddit. So I don't know if you guys chanced upon that comment in your browsing this month, but I really liked it.
Part of what I loved about it is the connection that's drawn to it being like 6 out of 9 Supreme Court justices dying, especially with where I've grown up and the people that I'm around. Like, that's something that everyone would be like, oh my God, what is happening? And that's like a big deal for that to happen. These are people that, even if they're not necessarily on the small council, and by these people I mean the Kingsguard, they're not necessarily on the small council, but they do affect in some way like the policies and the way that the realm is ruled. They have as much power as even like Jaime to be like, we need to get this leader out of here.
And one of the Jaime chapters ends with him talking about the Kingmaker, Criston Cole, right? I mean, the Kingsguard historically has had a lot of power in the court, whether just by virtue of being guys with swords or political personal influence over their rulers. You think about the guys who were appointed ended up being the guys who beat Sansa when she was at Joffrey's court. That's not something anyone would have thought about when they were appointed to the Kingsguard, but they ended up being the type of men who did that for Joffrey, it's just something interesting to think about. I think if Lewin Martell had survived, say, and stayed on the Kingsguard, would he have hit Sansa in court? Like, would he have been one of those Kingsguard, or would he slap Joffrey across the face? Probably not.
Black of Heronheart, too, puts it really well. I'm just going to read part of it here. The bad rep of Robert's Kingsguard seems to come down less to the fact that they're bad swordsmen, and more that at least 4 of the 7, Jaime, Blunt, Trant, and more, are morally bankrupt. The integrity of the Kingsguard was pretty much obliterated when Jaime slew Aerys, and it never really recovered. Barristan was phoning it in because, deep down, he felt like a sellout for taking Robert's pardon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. That's a great analysis of Barristan, too. Doing his job, but his heart's not in it anymore, right? Which is why he has his 3/4 life crisis and goes to find Daenerys. Did I get the fractions right there?
Barristan's the one who, at the beginning of the books, is on the small council, so he's like, I'm actively a part of this regime.
Yeah.
I think there's also quite a bit of recency bias with saying that this is the worst Kingsguard ever, which is what a lot of people seem to say. There's been a lot of Kingsguard, and we've heard stories about them through all the time. Some of them had paramours. Criston Cole notably started a civil war. I don't think they're particularly quote-unquote bad Kingsguard. I think they're the ones that are around recently. And while Jaime killing his own king is pretty bad, the rest of them seem pretty in line with most of the Kingsguard, which are sort of no-name people we don't hear anything about. You hear a lot about the Lord Commanders, Ryam Redwine, and all those other kind of guys. But it seems like throughout history, a lot of the Kingsguard were political appointments who didn't take parts of their job too seriously. And it's just the fact that these are the ones that we know about, that we hear all these bad stories.
Matt, I totally agree. I think that's a really good point. And I think that if there's any theme that you can see in Martin's work, it's that people are people, and people are always people across time. And there's no particular reason to think that over time the samples of these 7 men would be any different than the ones before us now.
Exactly. We remember the great ones. Imagine what a Kingsguard under Maegor the Cruel would have had to do. The guy went out and collected skulls by the thousands and brought them back and dumped them in King's Landing. He had people who followed his orders too.
Yeah.
And
That's
as did Eris.
point.
I mean, Eris's Kingsguard, you could say they were just as bad as Robert's. Look at the things they let Eris get away with until Jaime actually took a moral action and shoved a sword in his back.
Yeah, when Michael was bringing up that question of like, would one of Eris's Kingsguard, would they have been willing to hit Sansa? I mean, like, it was the White Bull, right? He was like, yeah, it's our job to protect the queen, but not from him. So that makes you wonder, is this also the kind of person who'd be willing to continue following his king's orders even at the expense of the safety of another whom he's charged to protect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Jonathan Derry who was with Jaime outside the king's bedroom, but then obviously Arthur Dayne is standing around during these atrocities. And Arthur Dayne's a pretty good guy. He got the small folk on his side with the brotherhood thing. Like, he's generally not a bad person, you would think, but obviously let Aerys get away with some stuff. I remember there was a So Spake Martin where someone asked him, how could a guy like Arthur Dayne let Aerys get away with that? And George just did his like, oh, well, keep reading. Yes.
Scratched his beard.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to tell. How could you even judge how good of a person Arthur Dayne is?
Right.
I mean,
right.
All we know about him is that he followed orders. Is there such thing as immoral orders? And to Arthur Dayne, apparently those didn't exist. Or to a lot of the Kingsguard, because that was their job, to ignore those.
Is Sandor Clegane the best Kingsguard because he kills a boy on orders and is beginning to repent of it?
He quits when he gets when he doesn't want to take Joffrey's orders anymore. That's certainly more than most of the other ones did.
So speaking of Sandor Clegane, actually, as the truest of the Kingsguard, there was another really good post specifically regarding Sandor by Seventh Queel called, this is a long one, Sandor Clegane, the Anti-Knight, and how George R. R. Martin is building up his character to fulfill or perhaps deconstruct the dragon-slaying knight trope. At first, this post almost sounds like it's going to be some sort of weird tinfoily thing about Sandor becoming Azor Ahai and becoming a dragon or killing a dragon, either one. But it's actually a great post that really breaks down a character analysis of Sandor, Sansa, a little bit of Brienne, and sort of mixes them all together and how they relate to each other and the persona of the Hound and how that gets passed from person to person. It's a gold mine, this post, I think. My favorite part from it was one that they actually referenced from an old Cantus post from like 3 or 4 years ago. Cantus? That was about how in Sansa's subconscious, she acted out a marriage ceremony with Sandor on the night of the Blackwater, where he gives her his cloak, and then she remembers a kiss, even though it didn't happen, and this mimics a wedding ceremony. And I think that's a great insight, both into Sansa and Sandor. Maybe they both sort of, without realizing it, were acting out this romantic trope together. Because Sandor, again, is the truest knight in the Seven Kingdoms, I think. So what did you guys think? Did you have a favorite moment from this post or anything like that?
There's just so much in this post that I liked, like as it built together as a whole, that I don't think I can pick like one moment.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what I was getting into going into it, and then it just was a really great character analysis of like where Sandor Clegane stands in regards to knights, his ideas. And particularly, this is something that like went through the entire post. It was like, sort of just analyzing how important the idea of honesty is to Sandor Clegane, and that people not lie. And it kind of made me wonder, actually, at one point where they bring up how Sandor is extremely honest to Arya when she asks about the death of her friend Micah, and he says to her, yeah, I rode down Micah and cut him in half, and he was laughing while he did it. And there's no doubt that like parts of that are definitely true. He definitely killed Micah by like riding him down and likely cutting him in half. But you have to wonder if does Sandor Clegane really take that much pleasure in killing people that he laughed? Or is this same as, like, when he told Arya later, yeah, I wish that I had, like, raped your sister and all these things just to, like, anger her? Like, is he honest only about the terrible things he does, or does he lie to try and make that seem worse for some reason?
Right. Is he trying to, like, exaggerate that horribleness that he's living out? He says he laughed about it, and then he's sobbing, Arya realizes. And I think it's up to the reader, maybe, whether he's sobbing because he's lying about laughing and all that to try and goad Arya, or whether he really did laugh when he wrote down Micah and is sobbing because he feels terrible about that, feels terrible remembering the way he laughed when he cut down this boy. You're right, it's really interesting what goes on with honesty in Sandor's story.
They brought this up in this post, the thing about fire and how he feels about Gregor. Sandor definitely seems like a kind of character who does horrible things because he was betrayed so early in his life. He doesn't want the people that were supposed to love him, notably Gregor and his family, terrible things happen to him because he trusted them. And you see throughout all these sort of actions, he's taunting people that have gotten close to them and trying to push them away with Sansa, Arya. And does he really feel great about what he did to Micah? No, but it helps him drive a wedge between Arya and himself, even more than he already has. He doesn't want to be her friend, but he does at the same time.
Right.
It's a really interesting sort of psychological analysis that goes on in this post, where you see how Sandor is still reeling from what happened with him and Gregor, even when he was a little boy. The little knight thing they played with, and the fire, and Sandor's such a hard character to get your mind around, but he's a great one. And the way he acts as a knight, even though he's never been knighted, makes a ton of sense. I think he's a very understandable character when you view him through his childhood.
And through his trauma. Like, on the page, he is coping with trauma, and it makes perfect sense in a world where power is literally how hard you can whack somebody with a sharp stick. People are going to be traumatized by that.
Yeah, right. He and Tyrion are kind of... The post didn't really go into this, but he and Tyrion have a lot in common in that sense, since they both have that sort of youth trauma. They're both regarded as deformed, twisted, scarred, and they both, at some point in the story, try and live out the whole, I will be the monster you think I am kind of thing, where Sandor plays that up so Arya will kill him to make himself a monster for her to kill. Obviously, Tyrion does that all through A Dance with Dragons, which is really enjoyable to read and makes for very fun reading.
And of course, for both of them, there's only room for one of them in their little spheres. They can't actually get together on this and support each other.
On their crazy revenge thing. Although Tyrion never gets his gravedigger. He never finds his peace so far. At least Sandor's doing something positive about his life. And you could see that as a very different way of taking a tortured character. Not everybody gets bad endings in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Sandor Clegane is the Prince Zuko of A Song of Ice and Fire.
That's right.
Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. His honor.
His honor. Oh my god, that's such a great comparison. Yeah, it's exactly the same character, except Sandor is much more horrible in the things he does.
He is pretty terrible. Now to get tinfoily a little bit, the post did it just a little bit, where the author Seventh Queel suggests that Sandor is fated to be part of the Faith Militant and fight a dragon, to sort of live up to this whole knight slaying a dragon thing. How do you think that could play out, if at all? Like, is he gonna dethrone Aegon the Sixth when he comes to Westeros? Is he gonna slay a quote unquote dragon, or is that just sort of barking up the wrong tree and the analysis is there but not the plot?
Sandor is just at such a different register than like Daenerys. You don't really see them facing off in a satisfying way. And there isn't a dragon anywhere around Sansa where Sandor might be interested.
Ice dragons.
Except the ice dragon.
Now that's what I call defying a trope.
They don't really have a lot of dragons to spare. If Sandor is going to kill one, are any of these dragons going to make it to when the others come? Maybe they're all going to die.
No. That's the secret. They're all going to die.
Oh. Wait, I got it. What if Robert Strong steals a dragon, comes after Sandor, and Sandor runs up the dragon's back, and cuts Gregor's head off, and rides north to be Azor Ahai? Tinfoil.
Wow, I'm
See how
hyped.
easy I did that?
He could be born in salt and smoke, and like the salt of what his tears when he was
Yeah,
crying, and smoke from when it
When his face was melting.
Now, I would argue actually the Hound persona, not Sandor, but the Hound, has
Salt
been
pans.
born in salt and smoke because the Rorge burned salt pans wearing the Hound's helmet, right? And if Brienne ends up wearing the helmet, as I think Seventh Quill suggests, then that's like the third incarnation. It goes Sandor. Oh, no, it's the fourth. Sandor, Rorge, Lem, and then Brienne. Doesn't work. Never mind. Forget
I'm
it.
never forgetting it.
Unconfirmed.
Beautiful.
Speaking of Brienne, something that I really love that this post does, and I'm sure you see it, they definitely like more or less draw those parallels between like Lord of the Rings and Brienne by pointing out, what I like about this is twofold. On one hand, it gives Sandor, Clegane that peace of like, yeah, let's not put him in Clegane Bowl. He's found peace. He's just like chill now and is good with himself. And then they have Brienne taking on the persona of the Hound, and then being a woman can slay the man that no other living man can withstand. It's just very Lord of the Rings.
This thread is full of amazing. Seventh Quill writes in a comment, I just realized why Qyburn specifically requests women to use in his experiments. He's making shadow babies to reanimate Gregor's corpse. That's why they live so long, yet eventually get used up. He's practicing the creation of shadow babies. That's bonkers. It's so great. I love it.
I think that's...
It's such a baller idea.
I don't think my tinfoil hat's big enough for it.
I'm not against it.
No, this is where I draw the line.
Really?
No.
Yeah, I think really you draw the line there. Interestingly, I don't draw the line there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I could see that because so far Robert Strong is such an anomaly in the whole necromancy thing, given that we've seen sort of the others doing their thing and Thoros and Beric doing the fire side of that. But Qyburn's sort of in this middle ground that's not really clear yet. So if it does turn out to be something related to like shadow binding, like he's binding, even if it's not the creating shadow babies, but just some sort of shadow binding to create Robert Strong, I can see that. Yeah.
I mean, only death can pay for life. So if he is sacrificing like these other people in order to create
We need
this
to do the
reanimated
algebra
thing,
on how many souls you need to reanimate somebody as big as Gregor Clegane. Like, how many people do you need?
I don't math.
I think it's like a 10th level caster spell too.
Next up from our subreddit highlights, we have Theon's fourth encounter with a heart tree by user Shadimmaculate. I can't believe I got that. Shadimmaculate.
Are you sure it's not pronounced as Chad?
I assume Shad. Chadimmaculate?
Chad.
Chadimmaculate?
What a Chad.
Okay, I'll try this
Immaculate
again.
Chad.
Okay. Next up in our subreddit highlights, we have Theon's fourth encounter with a heart tree by Chad Immaculate, where they break down all the times that Theon has been in front of a heart tree, which we actually know is Bran speaking to him, and sort of goes through the interactions and what Bran is learning about Theon and how he's sort of being manipulated into a position where he'll do something that Bran wants him to do. And the thesis of the post is that there's three encounters. They say there's going to be a fourth one. Most people think that Theon at the end of A Dance with Dragons is going to be burned by Stannis similar to what happens to Shireen in the show. What Chad Immaculate instead says is that Bran is going to intervene and that Stannis is going to try and sacrifice Theon to the heart tree instead on Asha's suggestion. Bran's going to intervene somehow using the trees, using tree magic, and prevent Theon's death for a larger purpose, which seems to be taking back Winterfell. What do you guys think about this one?
The theory, it's well-crafted theory, right? Predictions and speculation are its own fun thing, and that's fine. But I bounce off the ones that are based on Bran reaching through the weirwood net to push people around or to change their brains or inhabit their bodies or, that make Bran this kind of like super agency that accomplishes all the things. He's not Paul Atreides. That's not Bran. That's a different story, right? So that's where I bounce off this theory, is the idea that Theon is being rebuilt as an avatar for Bran to accomplish material goals in the world.
I think it's building up to Bran being able to do something like that in the story. But that's such a powerful plot device that it would be a real shame if George just started throwing it in everybody's story and was like, oh yeah, and then Bran told Arya to do this, and then Bran told Theon to do that, and like if Bran turned into this supercomputer playing the rest of the story, if he is gonna do something like this, and it might even still be with Theon someday, that's the thing, like there is this setup here with Chad, which Chad points out very well for us. The idea that the heart trees are whispering to Theon and they're talking. Maybe there is going to be something between Bran and Theon, but Bran being able to influence people is a real big plot point or plot device.
In defense of the theory, though, what they say Bran is actually going to do is what he already does with Theon, where he says his name, and Theon's able to hear it. That's like, it's not going to be like a tree coming down and swiping the sword out of Stannis' hand. He's just going to try and speak through the tree like we've already seen he's able to, and try and get Stannis to miss out of surprise, which is not the craziest thing.
No, that's a really good point. I love the idea of open access to the whole history of Westeros. I think that's where some of it's going to come from. And I think that having access to the whole history of Westeros, he's going to use that push power for something really big.
Like maybe he whispers Rhaegar's name to Lyanna at a heart tree in Harrenhal or something like that. I've always liked the idea that Theon is going to somehow be the key to infiltrating Winterfell, that his survival is important. So the idea that Bran pushes him to do that is kind of a cool one from their characters, because as Chad points out, Theon has his confession to the tree and everything, and he's confessing to Bran, like he's telling Bran how sorry he is, even if he doesn't know that. It's such a cool idea to tie that in, that relationship, and be like, oh yeah, Bran and Theon will somehow, quote-unquote, work together to infiltrate Winterfell.
For me, that's like the part that I actually really loved about this post. Like, he's confessing to Bran, but like it's a moment of absolute like regret. I mean, and Chad points this out. He says Bran consoles Theon by touching his brow, which is an act of forgiveness. Theon is at the point where he's just feels so bad, he's like ready to die. He's like, touch me, kill me. And it becomes not just Bran playing Theon as a pawn. It becomes this story of this person has done something absolutely almost like unforgivable to you. They've essentially they've killed like 2 children. They've killed other people close to you, driven you out of your home. Can you find it in your heart? They've led to your other family members dying because they lost the war because you took over that castle. Can you forgive them if they absolutely just feel so badly about it? And then is there even a path for redemption for them? Do they earn redemption by helping you with your goals, or is it just like you forgiving them? What is redemption? What is forgiveness?
Right. Yeah. That's a really good point, Eliana. Yeah. How it's about that relationship between Bran and Theon, just as much as it is about the plot point of who's going to get into Winterfell when.
How does it work in a Game of Thrones, where Theon shoots the bandit and...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Theon saved Bran's life, right? But in a way that Robb was really upset about.
Right, yeah. Like he takes the shot even though he shouldn't.
Bran probably didn't see it that way. He probably felt very good about that moment. He's like, my older brother saved me. I don't understand why Robb is upset.
Right, yeah. Brother Theon saved me.
And for our last subreddit highlight, we have a post from our own esteemed Senator Skeletor. Bran failed a test when he met some new friends. The idea behind this is that when Jojen and Bran are traveling to get north of the wall, they say some curious things to Bran, and they say they swear by earth and water, I swear by bronze and iron, and then they say we swear it by ice and fire. And then what Senator Skeletor does is he bundles that in with the idea that they are surprised that Ned has not told any of his children about the Night of the Laughing Tree and what happened with Rhaegar and Lyanna. So it's what Senator Skeletor ends up saying is that they were giving him tests to know how deep into Rhaegar and Lyanna and Jon Snow they really are, if they can trust Bran to tell him what they already know about the truth between Rhaegar and Lyanna. I thought it was a really excellent post. I had never really thought of it that way. I thought they were just saying kind of weird oaths and just sort of gossiping about what they know about their fathers, but this gives all those moments a really good reason for why they exist in the story, in moments that seem kind of even Bran didn't understand what was going on. What do you guys think?
I'm just going to go ahead and say that I really liked how Senator Skeletor tied in the "I wish you good fortune in the wars to come" line from the show, because I think it's a great point that is repeated by Arthur Dayne and Mance Rayder, who are not the same person. It's like this exact line that's repeated, and maybe it's just thematic, maybe it's just them echoing the same ideas. It's an idea that I hadn't seen before, which is that some sort of phrase or line or oath or whatever from the Tower of Joy comes back later in the series, and we don't recognize it because we haven't accessed it yet.
Yeah, they have a code phrase for people in the know. If you talk about ice and fire to somebody and they know what you're talking about, then they're not in on a conspiracy. Or if you wish them good fortune in the wars to come, that kind of thing.
I think what we're saying is that it's surprising that Howland Reed has the corner on this particular market in the meme economy.
Exactly. No, exactly. Like, why has no one else spread the ice and fire meme, the ice and fire oath meme? It's just Howland's kids, which does seem a little out of place. Again, unless Howland knows something.
That is one of the better points of this is, why did Ned leave these stories out? Why wouldn't he tell them about their aunt? Or this strange story that Ned absolutely knows about? Anything about it? Why is he lying when Howland's telling the truth?
Well, it seems it might be like in character for Ned, considering that he might be like, wow, this was crazy. I can't believe that my sister died for this. And for this idea, considering that he should be the one, if he believes in this prophecy, most convinced at the beginning of the story when Garrett comes across the wall and says, the others are coming. And he's like, no, they're not. You're a deserter. But like, if he actually bought into the prophecy, he would have been like, yo, that's right. That's happening.
Classic Ned Stark right there.
Yeah. So the fact that he doesn't believe in this magic stuff says that maybe he was always sort of a skeptic to the idea of this prophecy if it were presented to him.
I think the books all but tell us how traumatized Ned is by the Tower of Joy experience. And he may literally not be able to reflect upon it. It's just boxed up and put away, and he freaks out if Catelyn brings it up. It's just a thing he's not processing. Dealing with a deserter from the Night's Watch, that's one bucket. And dealing with Lyanna is a totally different bucket.
Right, yeah. He does not seem like a guy who's good at processing complex emotions in a healthy way. I'm just going to say that. I think a lot of the characters aren't.
Have y'all ever noticed how much he talks about himself in the third person in his point of view? Eddard Stark did not belong in King's Landing with among all these perfumed courtiers. And I did a Ned Stark point of view reread a few years ago, and it just popped. It was just constantly talking about himself. In every chapter, it was... More
so than people like Tyrion and Catelyn and Dany and all that. Because I gotta admit, I noticed that stuff like Eddard Stark did not belong here, but I just assumed that was like first entry in the series weirdness, like George R. Martin finding the voice. Maybe that's his voice for Eddard Stark, is a guy who's really detached from himself. I had never thought of that. That's so cool.
I think you can also find some reasoning for why Howland would have told his kids and Ned didn't in their upbringing. We hear from Ned Stark that he spent his time in the Vale with Robert Baratheon just kind of being squires, just doing lordling things. They're having a good time, they're meeting girls, they're going to joust. We hear from Howland that he spent like a year on the Isle of Faces on a pilgrimage. From those two characters, if you tell them that Rhaegar and Lyanna's child is going to bring about something from the children of the forest, Howland will probably believe that, Ned will not, because those are very different ways of viewing the world.
Right. That's a great point about Howland coming up.
He's kind of a conspiracy theorist himself. He communicates with the old gods, which we know is likely Bloodraven or Bran. Ned just kind of sits on a tree and cleans his sword. That's not really interacting with them in a way he really thinks they're real. It's kind of like an emotional crutch for him, where for Howland, these things are real.
Whereas also, like, going back to, like, Ned's trauma, I mean, it's way easier for Howland to tell the story of, like, yo, this is how my friend's sister died, as opposed to Ned being like, this is how my sister died.
Right.
Do you think he said yeah?
That's true.
Yo,
yeah,
Ned.
I do.
It's me, Howland. Yo.
It's your bro, Howland. Bruv.
What up? On this episode of Maester Monthly, we're going to introduce a new special feature, which I'm sure is going to be wildly popular. namely the Unpopular Opinion Thunderdome.
Engines rubbing.
Thunder, yeah. This time on the Unpopular Opinion Thunderdome, the opinion in the Thunderdome is that A Feast for Crows is wildly underrated and in fact could be the greatest Song of Ice and Fire or George R. R. Martin novel of all time. All right, that's what's on the table. So where does everyone stand on this? Where does everyone fall on this? I'm kind of curious.
Okay, so to start off my unpopular opinion, A Feast for Crows is great. It's maybe the best book, and if you disagree, then you're wrong, and I hate you. That's basically where we're going with this. I think through a lot of the story, we kind of see action going very quickly. And that's sort of what readers crave. They want to see the Battle of the Blackwater. They want to see what Tyrion's doing. All these other all these big plots moving forwards. And A Feast for Crows just sort of slows down and be like, these things that you've been enjoying reading, this is actually the cost to all these things. This is what it's like for everyone else that's not these High Lords. This is taking a look at the common people and just... We root for Robb Stark, but his war has devastated the Riverlands, and we see that through these characters and all these other, like Dorne and all these other places are all trying to react to the story that they really have no part of so far. They're kind of on the outside. And so A Feast for Crows is great because it gives you perspective and the internal philosophy of the story that you should be thinking about while you're rooting for Robb Stark. Go.
Damn. Coming in hot.
So, Matt, you're wrong.
Oh, what? How dare you?
Look, Feast for Crows is not the story that was promised at the end of A Storm of Swords. At the end of Storm of Swords, we have Tyrion on the run. We have Arya on the run. We have just met Lady Stoneheart. And now we're going to take a meander through the heart of war-torn Westeros with some new characters not accomplishing anything, and explicitly so. We already know they're not going to accomplish what they set out to do, except for I really like Jaime's Feast for Crows story, but that's the wrong side of the Thunderdome. Okay, so it's not it's not book 4 of the series that Game of Thrones and Clash of Kings and Storm of Swords are the first 3 books of. Right? Feast for Crows also spends a lot of time in Cersei's point of view. Cersei is a very interesting character when other people are looking at her, telling us what she's saying and what she's doing, but inside her own head. I'll take the unpopular opinion on this. I don't like Cersei's point of view from the way it's written. I don't enjoy reading it. I know some people find it hilarious. I know some people see it as her comeuppance. I don't enjoy it. I think that it's I think that Martin gets to the points that he makes in Cersei's point of view in better ways in other points of view. And finally, Feast for Crows, I haven't even ever read it. I read the boiled
Blasphemous.
I read
How dare
the
you.
boiled leather combined order. I read it interspersed within A Dance with Dragons. And so and I have no plans to read it as a coherent work because I don't want to chase back and forth between the 2 chronologies.
Would you say it is not a coherent work?
It's a chopped up piece of a single big story, a big, possibly unwieldy story. But it's, it doesn't stand alone. It's not its own thing. It depends on the other 4 books to hold it up and put it in its place and to tell the parts of the story that it's not telling.
Michael, read the Broken Man speech until she likes it.
I actually got George to sign that page of Feast in one of the moments in my life where memes overtook like my better judgment. No, wow. Okay, so that's a fairly fiery. That is almost a fire as hot as the burning Tower of the Hand. So Feast, for me, it was disappointing the first time I read it. I felt the same way about Dance. Once I knew where the plot was going, like once I'd read it and got the bullet points of the plot down and all that, I enjoyed it a lot more. Like when I was reading Dance and Dany just was not going to Westeros and we had to deal with all this stupid Rhaneys politics stuff, I was like, okay, this is a terrible book. And then I appreciate it a little more now. So that's how it was for Feast for me. it's just so subtle and nuanced and alive with subtle nuance in every page. It's such a it just drips with nuance.
Dripping with nuance.
I thought what you were saying about Cersei's point of view is really interesting, Isabel, though. Like, do you think that she's too much of a caricature in Feast?
Oh, that's a good way of putting it. I think that...
Of the person she was in the first couple books?
Because I wouldn't have said caricature, but I think that a lot of the genius of these books is in Martin's ability to grab you and bring you into sympathy with these people who you normally would stay the hell away from and understand where they're coming from. We get to meet someone like Jaime, and we get to meet someone like Tyrion, and we get to meet someone like Arya, and we get to meet people who we see doing terrible things and we understand why. But with Cersei, we see her doing terrible things, and it's like we're supposed to react with ha ha, and oh, that happened, and we see people being terrible around her, and we're supposed to be like, ha ha, she deserved that. When you read it for subtle nuance, you're learning about why she is. You're learning things, but I just never have been able to feel like I was brought in to be in sympathy with her or in empathy with her.
Right. The joke has always been on her. Eliana, I know you have strong ones about the prophecy in Cersei's chapters. So does that color your opinion of Feast?
So, I have mixed feelings about Feast. There are things about it that I really like, that I think it does better than the other books. And there are things that I think it doesn't do and is unsuccessful in as a standalone book in this series. Like, so you bring up the prophecy of Cersei, and that's one of the things that I actually really dislike, because I think it undercuts so much of her character development. Like, a lot of the prophecy is like, oh, you're gonna marry the king but not the prince, and he's gonna have all these children and not you, and then your little brother's going to kill you, or well, not the little brother is going to kill you, and then there's going to be another younger woman, not little sibling, actually. I have a whole thing about this. We can go into it. Okay, fine, we'll go into it. So, in Valyrian, the language that was created for the TV show, which was approved, of course, by George R. R. Martin, created by David Peterson, there is a word specifically for little sister, which is Haydar, which is not Valonqar. And on top of that, there's him pointing out that there's a misunderstanding on Maester Aemon's part about the dragons. It's not that they are changeable and at one moment male, at another moment female. They are hermaphroditic, and thus both at the same time, and that it's a misunderstanding of the Valyrian language, which is in fact gendered. It has the, aquatic, a terrestrial, and I think the lunar and solar genders, which is, genders are different in linguistics and in language than they are as we think about them as humans. That's my rant about the Valonqar, which only means little brother. It could be a little brother or the little brother. There's no specification on the article.
And also, Cersei's prophecy is exactly that thing about magic that can be so frustrating in high fantasy, where the magic is substituting for the characters making choices, having their character moment. Like, oh no, she's just explained because Maggie the Frog told her something that kind of wigged her out.
But all of those things were in Cersei as a character already without the prophecy. She had that internalized misogyny to already hate the possibility of a younger woman who might be more beautiful and threatening her position. She already hated Tyrion for killing her mom and all those other things. And she was paranoid about him anyway. She didn't need a prophecy
to explain
to
that.
Flesh her out.
Yeah. So Matt, I feel like you're probably going to have some opinions about this, given that this is the Opinion Thunderdome.
I am firing back. You guys have focused on Cersei Lannister, who is one POV character. Let me go ahead and read the list of characters in this. We get Pate, the pig boy, an exciting prologue. Jaime Lannister, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Brienne of Tarth, maybe the best POV in the story. It is amazing. And you're wrong if you disagree. Then you get Sansa Stark pretending to be Elaine Stone in the Vale. You get Arya Stark being Cat of the Canals. Samwell on his journey. Along with that, you get Aeron Damphair, Asha Greyjoy, Victarion Greyjoy, Areo Hota, Eris Oakheart, and Arianne Martell. Those are amazing POVs. Their stories are great.
I will say Brienne's chapters, I agree with you on this. They're some of my favorites in the series, behind Quentyn probably.
Sadly, no Quentyn.
I really bounce off of Brienne in Feast for Crows. Set aside the Broken Man speech and bring me in on how Brienne is that good a POV.
Okay, so if you look at Feast for Crows as a whole, that of all 5 of the books, A Feast for Crows, especially with if you count the POVs that are in it, does the best job of exploring the idea of sexuality, gender, and gender roles in Planetos, specifically because all of these POVs are in Westeros. And Brienne is another facet of that, and she explores like how a woman who doesn't necessarily feel that that's her role can act that way. She serves as a great foil to Cersei, especially when you look at the way that the book is organized. If you look at how the chapters are put together, the Cersei and Brienne chapters are often put very close to one another, or sometimes like one right after the other, because they're meant to juxtapose each other.
And also Brienne has all the things you want from a great POV character. She doesn't know everything. She's trying to find Sansa, doesn't really know where to find her. She's not one of these, she's not like Baelish or somebody else who is just like manipulating the world as they see it. She's trying to find her own way in the story. Number 1, for why Brienne is great. Number 2, it has action. She actually has action in her POV. She fights battles. She ends up killing those guys. She ends up burying, what's his name? Oh god, what's that guy's name?
Yeah, he must have been so important that you remembered his name. Big deal.
I mean, it's Nimble Dick, yeah.
Nimble Dick Crab. My memory is not an accurate measurement of how good something is.
In a book as slow as Feast, as contemplative and subtle as Feast, how about that?
Soulful.
Brienne does have probably the most action, which isn't saying much, but other than that, it's like Arianne Martell in her Queenmaker chapter, and maybe Arya once or twice, I forget, but yeah, and those two, her fight scenes, the one at the tavern, where it's 1 against 9, no chance and no choice, that's like my favorite moment in the series, because that's such a good summation of, I think, what George is getting at the whole time about it's always worth it to be the good person, to be the true knight, even if you stand no chance whatsoever. Brienne encapsulates the grand theme of the whole story about it's worth it to try to be the hero and to save the day and all that, even if it's gonna cost you half your face and maybe you'll be hanged by the undead revenant of a person you swore your sword to.
I may be willing to reread Feast for Crows. Maybe not until I like it. We meet Cersei in the first 3 books, and we meet Brienne in the second and third books through Jaime's point of view. I think that maybe what I need to do is read Cersei and Brienne's chapters as if it was kind of like Jaime Lannister doing a There and Back Again telling of what he understood Cersei and Brienne's adventures to be during the time that he was out in the Riverlands. And now he's telling their stories in their voice and his understanding of them. And that's why Cersei is so inaccessible, because he is discovering how inaccessible she is. And that's why Brienne is interacting with the world the way she is, because that's how Jaime wishes he had been interacting with the world when he was Brienne's age and at that stage in his career. That's the way I'm going to read Feast for Crows until I like it.
Now that is an interesting idea, although you're right, to read it as through Jaime's eyes. They're there to develop Jaime more in that book, too, in general.
Also going to mention that A Feast for Crows is the book of the underdogs. These are not the main characters in most of their stories. These are the people who are following along as the larger plot to go on above them, and seeing the underside of A Song of Ice and Fire. And while with the rest of the books, you can sort of think of them as like the limbs of the story, that they're like moving the story along. But A Feast for Crows is the brain, the soul of the story. The point of why you're seeing all these things move forward.
What in the book asserts that it is, in fact, the heart and soul of A Song of Ice and Fire? Because if it's the idea of the underdog and the outsider, don't we have that to an extent already in the stories of a bastard son of Winterfell who is not destined to inherit anything, the crippled boy who dreamed of being a knight and can't fulfill his dreams, the homeless orphan girl who is sold into slavery? Like, they already have their underdog stories that they go over. A Feast for Crows doesn't have the same narrative structure that the other books do, which I think is part of the problem that people have. I didn't notice this problem because I didn't read the books until like Dance was already out, so I was able to just go through it and didn't notice that difference as much. But Feast doesn't have that arc of, you know, this is what we're going through, this, and then we are building into this climax, and then there's a fallout, and there's various moments of that, and you can argue that like Feast is more, I guess, atmospheric or like world building than that, but then that doesn't make it a story or a narrative contained in a book. That makes it a...
I mean, it's a chapter in what George considers to be the huge novel, which works on some level and on another level doesn't. Like you were saying, it doesn't have that structure. And especially what you said about like the building to a climax. The end of book 1, for the first time in 1,000 years, the dragon song rang in the air. The end of book 2 is Bran. It's not dead. It's like me, just broken. The end of book 3 with Stoneheart. The end of book 4 is I'm Pate, like the pig boy. Like, that's his big, like, mic drop moment. Even book 5 has Dany and the Dothraki Sea. So it's you're right. It doesn't necessarily build to like that climactic moment that he's so good at building in general. Like a lot, even just throughout the books, in the end of a chapter, you get these cliffhangers and climaxes. I think you're not in tune with how subtle and nuanced it is.
I do like Feast, and as I've said before, I'm not sure if it's Stockholm Syndrome, that I've just like read the book and I'm like, yeah, this is great. Look at the feminist themes. Look at how I think that all these different things run through it.
Well, you know, I don't want to cut off the discussion in the Unpopular Opinion Thunderdome too quickly, but I think at some point we have to get beyond Thunderdome. Am I right?
Oh my god, it's so good.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think we'll cut the discussion there, and we'll all agree that Feast is the best book. I think we can all agree on that now.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay.
Good. Moving
Or
on.
agree to disagree, maybe.
You can say Feast is an okay book.
Look, it is okay. You guys shouldn't feel bad about being wrong. It's okay.
That's wrong.
There's room for that.
Everyone should delete their accounts.
That's what's so beautiful about the fandom. You know, there's room for everyone to be wrong. Feast is the official statement of Maester Monthly. Now, our big topic for the day is going to be talking about the Citadel and the Order of the Maesters. Now, Isabel had to step out. She is our auto-moderator whisperer, and as such had to go whisper sweet nothings to auto-moderator to make sure we don't ever have to actually moderate the subreddit. We can just record podcasts all day long. But so today we're going to talk about the Citadel and the Maesters, what they're all up to, what they know, what they're trying to do, everything all together. Matt, can you lead us into this massive topic?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So the Citadel was founded a long, long time ago by Prince Paramore the Twisted, who was the second son of King Uther of the High Tower. He was a sickly boy born with a withered arm and a twisted back. He was bedridden for much of his short life and had an insatiable thirst for knowledge about the world. So he turned to wise men, teachers, priests, healers, and singers, as well as wizards, alchemists, and sorcerers. When Paramore died, his brother, King Uragon, bequeathed a large tract of land beside the Honeywine, the river, to Paramore's pets, that they might establish and continue in their quest for knowledge. And thus the Citadel and the Order of Maesters was established. So...
What a tale.
What a tale.
I'm kind of curious, how much do you guys think that's real, and how much do you think that's the Citadel's cover story? Like, it's clearly ancient history, right? Because it's back when there was a king of the High Tower. So it's long enough ago that it's gotten twisted and meandered by the foibles of history. If it's inaccurate, why? What are they trying to hide?
Well, we know from the history of the Citadel and the Maesters that they like to suppress things from time to time. So they may have had a much less grand origin story. Like, they originally used to practice necromancy and essentially banish Qyburn for even looking into it, even a subject that's close to it. So it's likely, like you're saying, that there's something else going on, that the Citadel is not as founded as a beacon of knowledge, that they probably had some other reason for being founded.
There's something there. So That's a really good insight that like there might be something else going on there, because interestingly they were like the competitors and supplanted the power of the Alchemist Guild. And if that's kind of like magical, maybe
That's
the
right.
Citadel was doing something. But it just feels like the thing that I think there is a kernel of truth to is the idea that Paramir, the twisted Paramore, the twisted Paramore, the twisted
Paramore
was bedridden and sought knowledge, because from what I've heard of George R. R. Martin speaking about his life in the past, like he talks about how I grew up on this small road in New Jersey and my whole world was just that house where I lived and me walking to school and back and forth, and that's all I had, and the rest of the world that I got was through books. It was through knowledge, and that's how I engaged with everything else. And you see this throughout his whole story. So that's what I think is the one kernel of truth. But I think that's interesting. I didn't think about like that the Citadel might be nefarious.
Well, maybe not nefarious, just not as...
Right. No, I like that, tying it to George, though. That seems like something he would write into the backstory. You know, Paramore being a sort of XP for himself as a boy, just wanting to summon everyone. Like, if he was a prince when he was a boy, George R. R. Martin would have just, like, summoned every professor and author to his house and been like, come tell me stories.
He would have been like, Stanley, come here, tell me about Marvel comics. There's also something else interesting about the Citadel's founding when you see the story of Paramore Hightower. It's very similar to Bran. It's a little sickly boy who's been broken and twisted, and he seeks knowledge, which for Bran, he ends up underneath a tree. Paramore ends up building the first university in Westeros, but...
First and only.
They're very similar stories, and then it even gets maybe a little tinfoily when you consider that the Hightower was built by Bran the Builder. If all these crazy theories about Bran the Builder is actually Bran going back in time, maybe Paramore Hightower is a fictional character. It was actually maybe Bran somehow.
Whoa.
I mean, it is crazy tinfoil, but the stories do kind of go back and forth with each other.
That's an interesting interaction, yeah. Tying it into Bran the Builder, our Bran, all that kind of stuff, yeah. Because it is kind of weird that we don't... I mean, The World of Ice and Fire gave us the origin story, but we knew nothing about, like, the founding principles and all that of the Citadel, even in Feast, when we had, like, point of view chapters in Old Town for the first time. So it's interesting that it's so ancient and shrouded in mystery for an organization that's, like, integral to not just how Westeros works, but how the story works. Like, ravens flying from place to place is how the plot gets to work, basically.
And the part about the ravens is interesting, too, because they have an entire island just for the ravens, which was founded on an old supposed pirate fortress, where there's a weirwood growing, and they have towers for each kind of raven, and you have to get there by bridge. It seems... For George, that seems like a very fantasy idea that he doesn't usually subscribe to. Like, this magical island is full of these birds that can talk to people. Or
you get there using a bridge? You don't take a boat? You just cross a bridge to this island?
It's a raised bridge. It's like a big stone bridge across the water.
Whoa.
It seems, with the weirwood in the middle and the ravens everywhere, it sounds like a very interesting place to visit.
It sounds like a thematic copy of the God's Eye and you know what I mean, the Isle of the Green Men on the God's Eye, with the idea that it's this island.
Maybe they recreated it.
Yeah, right. Or like it's like this common factor between people who lived here way before giants and all that kind of stuff.
Well, if all the Green Seers used to live in the Ravens and thus kind of still live there, even though how long have these birds been alive? Yeah, then that's definitely a thing that could connect the God's Eye and Raven Island.
Right. And this is an important point about the Citadel and the Maesters. They are ancient. They've been around for thousands of years. When all this crazy stuff was going on with Green Seers and giants and dragons, this is when they were founded. When we see them today, this is after the quote-unquote death of magic. After so many things have gone out of the world, their history is intertwined with all of these things, even though they kind of dispute that in the current time.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah, that they were founded when magic was strong in the world.
Yeah.
I used to think that they were like,
yeah.
they came in when the Andals came in, and they came in around that time, but apparently no. Yeah.
They are old. They are
right,
very
they're like
old.
ancient.
The High Towers have been the kings of Old Town, which it's in its name, it's quote-unquote Old Town, forever.
Yeah.
Nobody even
So
knows where the High
old.
Towers came from. Some people...
Right.
Yeah, so very old. Some people, like our buddy Lucifer Lifebringer, thinks that they are like a colony from the Great Empire of the Dawn. Like the Maesters
Right.
themselves may be the last remnants of what may have been like the Great Empire of Dawn University. Like this was like their
the
little...
Church of Starry Wisdom.
Yeah, the Church of Starry Wisdom. This was their little little school they threw off into Westeros, and this is the only one left. That could very well be what they are.
Right, so like the equivalent of like a Jesuit academy in South America,
Exactly.
built by the Great Empire of the Dawn. Yeah, okay, I'm with you 100% on this. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're in. We got this.
Jacking
Eliana's
in.
skeptical.
No, I just like haven't heard this, so it's taking me longer to wrap my head around.
Oh,
Right.
It's okay.
But I just like, it's like there's a lot that I only learned about
Yes,
the Maesters
that's
today.
happening a lot.
That's what this podcast is for.
That's what it's for. Learning.
Also,
things.
I'm just gonna say, Matt, I didn't even realize, but I'm on the wiki now, obviously, and Uthor, Paramore's father, is the one who commissioned Bran the Builder to build the High Tower.
Right.
I did not put that together when you were talking about that. Yeah.
It's like the founding of the Wall and the creation of Winterfell. The stories we hear cannot be possible. There's no way. You can't build
and Storm's
a
End,
giant skyscraping tower with an ever-burning fire and then in the same lifetime also build a university, essentially. Like the first one. That can't happen.
I mean, I can't, but maybe Bran the Builder could.
Maybe Bran the Builder can, because he's so
Yes,
magical.
he can.
Is there anything he can't build?
Bran the Builder.
Can he build it?
He build it?
Bran the Builder.
Yes, he can.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
And then we hear more about the actual layout of the Citadel. They have what is known as the Scribe's Hearth, which is what you expect because the Citadel is full of so many learned people. People come there to essentially do their legal documents, to get them to write letters for them. So there's actually
like
business
the notary
involved
public.
with the Maesters.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have income.
That is interesting, thinking about them as an institution that needs to exist with novices and acolytes who have to sweep the floors and things like that. And you got to wonder how many there are like Pate, who are just sort of like, they're novices, but they're never going anywhere. They're just there to be janitors in the Citadel. And they're always going to be a novice.
The promise of the chain they'll never get.
Right, exactly. Like, is there like just a common class of Pate type small folk people in
Seems to be.
the Citadel? While all of the Highborns are the one who actually gets the chains and things like that.
But we don't know that,
That's the
do
other-
we? Because like we don't know where all the
No, we
other
don't. No.
archmaesters come,
Yeah.
archmaesters and non-archmaesters and so forth come from.
Well,
It's
there
true,
is a
absolutely, yeah.
detail in how you get a link from a chain. You have to convince the Archmaester, essentially, that you know enough about the subject to get a link. So it's entirely subjective who gets these things. If they don't like what you're saying, or if they don't like you, it's not like a written test or anything. They decide who gets chains, specifically.
But could you like try going to one archmaester, and if they say no, you go to another one? And then you're like, "Whoa, I have this idea," and then you keep trying until you run out of archmaesters.
Well, each Archmaester is the Let's go into the Maesters as their structure in general. So we talked about novices and acolytes, like Pate and Samwell, who seems like he's going to try and become a Maester, are the very bottom. These are the guys who are basically undergraduates of the Maesters. Then, once you earn enough links of a chain that it can go all the way around your neck, which, by the way, encourages you to be a skinny Maester, then you become a full Maester. And you can stay at the Citadel, or you get loaned out to castles and keeps or different lords. They basically can request them, I guess, is how it works. And then above them the Council of Archmaesters. You could sort of see, if you were thinking about like Hogwarts, they would be the heads of the houses, sort of the different subjects. So like Archmaester Marwyn is the Archmaester of Magic with his Valyrian steel stuff. You could sort of see him as like a crazy McGonagall.
But all of
if
them
you
were
wanted
about
to.
magic and Harry Potter.
Yes.
That's true. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's only Marwyn. And then there's the Archmaester councils, and then the Grand Maester who serves the king in King's Landing, which actually makes it one of the most recent additions to the Maester hierarchy.
Good point.
There didn't used to be a King of Westeros.
There's also the Seneschal who's chosen every year, who presides over the Archmaester Council.
Kind of the president, more or less.
Yeah, right, like the elected chair for the year, which is kind of an interesting structure, I guess, because you don't see a lot of things that are chosen by... Yeah, you don't see a lot of democratic institutions in Westeros, except for, like, the Vale Wild people, right? They're democratic, and Tyrion thinks that's barbaric.
And the Night's Watch.
But the Archmaesters choose
Night's
their
Watch,
Seneschal. Yeah, and the Night's Watch.
Also...
That's true.
A structure built by Bran the Builder. Gas!
Bran's everywhere.
Bran the Builder.
Bran the Democrat. No, wait.
He's a filthy commie.
Yeah, Bran also founded all of the unions in Westeros. And,
oh my goodness. And to go back to Eliana's question, could you go around to different Archmaesters and try and get a link from them? The answer is no.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Because each Archmaester is of a specific subject. There's a list here, like if you get a link of black iron, that means you've earned it in Ravenry. Or if you have it in yellow gold, that's math and economics. It's all these intellectual pursuits broken down into little categories you can wear around your neck.
So you gotta wonder if, like, so you've got an Archmaester, right? Who's the Archmaester of, say, I think there's an economics one. So we'll say economics, because that's fun.
Sure.
Economics is fun. He's probably got, like, research assistants, right? He's got a couple Maesters who probably help him out with stuff.
Got some TAs.
They have his ear. So yeah, exactly. He's got some TAs, working on their theses. Could you buy off the research assistants and be like, look, talk me up to Archmaester whatever the heck. You sing my praises to him so that he can give me a link without me actually having to put in the work. Could you sort of curry favor? Because I'm sure
there has to be
possible.
Politics.
Right.
They're humans.
You can do it
there's
now.
politics and there's bribery. Yeah.
You can do it
That's
now.
true.
You could do it then.
That's right.
And the other thing is, the Archmaesters seem to have their positions for what seems like life, because
tenure.
We see from the Archmaester for Ravenry. Oh God, what's his name?
Walgrave.
Yes, Walgrave. He is senile and essentially has lost his mind, and that's the reason that Jaqen is trying to use Pate to get into the Citadel to get his key, is because Walgrave is the most checked out Archmaester, and they haven't done anything about it.
Yep.
So, if the Archmaester doesn't like you, or if he's really old, or he's stuck in his ways, you may not get that link. There's a lot of politicking in this.
Right. Is it even possible for Walgrave to give someone a link? Is he coherent enough to do that? Or is just nobody going to get a Raven link until he kicks the bucket?
Well, Ravenry's a very small subject. There's only a few of them that really deal with it.
And actually, I have answered my own question. Maester Gormon now judges those seeking a black link in Walgrave's place. Gormon, by the way, is Gorman Tyrell, I think.
Ooh.
He's Mace Tyrell's uncle. So you're seeing this sort of highborn thing where one of the Tyrell uncles is now sort of sitting in as acting Archmaester, even though he hasn't been elected. So yeah, it's a very political institution.
Gorman Tyrell obviously has like that alliance to the Tyrells. We get to Grand Maester
that guy.
Pycelle. That guy. And how they talk about how the Maesters are supposed to be, they are in essence supposed to be like the Night's Watch, and that they're like, oh, no more family, but they still carry with them their alliances. And Pycelle obviously has a very strong loyalty to the Lannister family for reasons unknown to anyone. Like, of all the people you could have picked, as we established earlier in this podcast, he picked Tywin.
Right. Tywin is successful. He was one of the best hands they'd ever seen until he decided to start killing everybody.
The best.
That's true. Yeah.
He was doing real good. Well, Grand Maester Pycelle got his position, weirdly, it seems, because Aemon Targaryen turned it down. Aegon V, Egg, as we know him, was granted him position of Grand Maester after Aemon turned it down and went to the Watch. And he was chosen specifically because he was so young at the time. because a lot of the Grand Maesters were old men, so they kept dying and becoming senile. So he wanted somebody to be his partner throughout his reign. And that's how we get our Grand Maester Pycelle. Yay.
It is interesting, because he has been around longer than almost any of the other characters on screen in the books. Like, he was appointed by Egg, and he was presumably there for the planning of what happened at Summerhall and things like that.
There was a recent post about that. They speculated that, did Pycelle have a hand in the explosion at Summerhall that killed the royal family? They make the argument that because he helps Aerys and he helps out Tywin do these horrible things, maybe he doesn't have a lot of morals? Maybe he has other things he's trying to accomplish. More than other Maesters.
We see him with his loyalties already tied up to Tywin, but like at the time of Summerhall, where were his loyalties? Because were they with the Lannisters? Has he always been a Lannister guy playing the party line? Or did he have other motives, and then he came to like Tywin when Tywin was at court, or something like that?
I don't know.
Are Pycelle and Tywin lovers? I don't think anyone's asked that question.
Whoa! I don't think anybody has asked it.
I've never heard anyone ask that question, but I think that's an interesting question.
Thank you.
Maybe. Tywin does protest too much, I would say. I see here that their relationship may have started, quote-unquote, a relationship, during the War of the Nine Penny Kings. Grand Maester Pycelle made his mark with actually bloodletting. And so he got his job as being a medical maester. So it's possible that he and Tywin may have met each other on the Stepstones and fighting Meleys the Monstrous and forged a relationship there in the same way that Aerys and Tywin did. That's where they first became friends.
It's so funny how
that's interesting.
How George just throws everybody in the War of the Nine Penny Kings, and like that's what it all that's where all these relationships come back to. Because like that's Baelish too.
Yeah.
I mean that's all this stuff.
You get all these like through lines of like causation and history being like this one huge thing.
Yeah.
And suddenly Southern ambitions. The root of Southern ambitions is just the War of the Nine Penny Kings, and like which has its roots in the Blackfire thing, which is suddenly coming back.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it depends on if you believe in Fagon or not. I'm a Fagon believer.
Absolutely.
Not Aegon Brightflame?
I mean, isn't Aegon Brightflame also somewhat founded on the idea of Blackfire being part of it?
It's a similar idea. It's just which ancestor they're coming from.
It's like a little of both.
Yeah. A little bit of column A.
It's a very nuanced point that Jeff loves.
Nuance. Hashtag subtle nuance.
And to get into more of Pycelle, he sort of proves the point that a lot of other characters make, that Maesters are not like perfect people. They have things they want. They have people they favor. They have goals. We see that with how he runs to Cersei for when Tyrion is testing who the leaker is within the small council. The things he argues for. It doesn't really seem like he's arguing much for the Citadel or really any sort of Grand Maester conspiracy kind of thing. It just seems like Grand Maester Pycelle is trying to stay in the game as an old man.
Yeah, staying a little longer on that idea. There's a post I want to highlight. I'm going to link it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
All
from
right,
3 years ago.
Oof.
And the post, the first title is, has anyone ever successfully made a strategic move in their own life based on ASOIAF? Inspired by Kim Kardashian and Kanye West of all people.
Oh.
And
as
everyone here knows, Tyrion feeds information to Varys, to Baelish, to Pycelle about what he's gonna do in regards to like Tommen and Myrcella, and then turns out the information that he gives to Pycelle gets to Cersei, and that's how he finds out who he can trust. So I'm gonna just read a lot of this post because it's short and trying to bring everything back to Kanye at the moment. So user with shoes 3 years ago says, in a rather brilliant move, in my opinion, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West sent out pictures of a baby that is not theirs to 6 of their friends. Each friend got different pics so they could simply wait to see which pictures leaked in order to find out Which friend, if any, betrayed their trust, and it seems to have worked? I can't help but think that they watched Tyrion do this to Pycelle, Varys, and Littlefinger in season 2 of the TV show. Does anyone else have a story of using a tactic in the books to solve a real-life problem? I don't know about everyone else's problems, but you too, everyone listening, can do this in your own life. Send your friends different information to find out who's really your friend. Who can you trust?
That's right. Find the Pycelle in your life.
Not Pycelle.
Yeah.
See who he is.
That's really funny.
Life of Pycelle.
Life of Pycelle.
Yes. Instead of Life of Pablo, Life of Pycelle.
That's a very sad life full of beards.
Yeah.
So talking about like the loyalties that Maesters have and all that, like Pycelle, obviously. In Dance, we get some discussion of this in the North in particular. There's Wyman Manderley who talks about how he doesn't trust his Maester because he's a Lannister of Lannisport distantly or something like that. But then, of course, there's also Barbary Dustin, who, brings up this idea of the Grey Rats conniving and pushing the Lords to do things, and this conspiracy and all that kind of stuff, these hidden motives that the Maesters have. So I was just kind of curious what you guys thought about the idea of a Maester conspiracy, like a grand overarching plan they have or something like that, loyalty to the cause.
Which part of it do you mean? Like the Maester conspiracy as it applies to Robert's Rebellion / Southern Ambitions, or do you mean the Maester conspiracy as it applies to the Grand Maester conspiracy as it applies to the extinction of magic?
So we hear from Barbary Dustin in what has become known as Southern Ambitions, the idea that Maester Wallace
Whaley's?
was,
yeah,
I don't know how to pronounce that. Walys.
Maybe it's lies because
Maester
he's full of lies.
Wow.
Oh my god, maybe that's it. Well, however you pronounce it, Maester Wallace, who was the trusted advisor of Rickard Stark, she blames the marriage alliance between Brandon Stark and Catelyn Tully squarely on him. She thinks that had he not interfered, that the Robert's Rebellion would have never happened, because Brandon would have married presumably herself, which, by the way, casts some doubt onto Barbary's claims. But it's also just sort of a larger idea. How much do the Maesters really push Lords into specific political action?
Right.
Do we really think that the Maesters had a good reason to make the Starks go south? And I don't really see it that much. It seems the evidence that Barbary's talking about and that you see from Wyman is sort of like in general that you just can't trust people. That people sometimes do selfish things, like we see from Pycelle, or we see from Maester Cresson when he tries to kill Melisandre. It's unlikely that those are signs of larger conspiracy and more just people give different advice.
I think you're talking about Cresson, Matt, is a good point here, because in the one chapter we do have from a Maester's perspective, it's not Cresson going, how shall I play out the master plan of the Seneschal? It's him, caring deeply about Stannis and Renly and trying to do what he feels is best for them. And I think in general that's something George is probably more likely to write, is like a story about people do things for these small personal reasons that they feel very strongly about, as opposed to like, some sort of complicated yarn and thumbtacks conspiracy. I do want to bring up, though, while we're talking about...
Especially because they grow up with these kids.
Yeah, exactly. They raise them, they teach them, like, they're like second parents to a lot of these kids, which, again, we see in Cresson.
Right, there's no schools in Westeros. It's the Maesters. Your school is whatever Maester's in your castle, if you have one. And they don't have any other students.
And Cresson is a great example because he's in the same book as, like, when we focused a lot on Maester Luwin, who is also a Maester to Winterfell. Like, both Cresson and Luwin, it's not just like Maester conspiracy. They die for the people that they've been teaching and raising. Like, Cresson's like, I'm gonna do this crazy thing and I'm gonna poison myself just so I can kill this other woman that I think is also crazy. And Maester Luwin's like, you can see like there's sort of like this weird cognitive dissonance in Lewin. Like he's sad for Theon because he also grew up with Theon and wants to like help him find his way.
Yeah.
But he also is willing to die for Bran and Rickon, who are, you know, like his sons to him, as Renly and Stannis are like sons to Crescent.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Exactly.
there is a loyalty there to their house, and I don't know. Maybe that muddies the argument. Maybe there are Maesters who are like in on a conspiracy, but from what the evidence that we have, they really love the people that they serve.
Right.
Specifically, if you look at what Wyman Manderley says, he says he can't trust his Maester because he's distantly related to the Lannisters. That's not really evidence of anything. That's just sort of saying, like, I don't trust somebody from Lannisport. That's not really anything about his Maester. Just, has he ever caught him sending something? Has he ever had a good reason why he can't mistrust him? Or is it because it's a Southerner and Wyman Manderley is very scared of a lot of things in his life? It seems like it's more the second one.
Not without good reason.
We don't really... not without good reason.
Yeah.
He does, yeah. He has good reason not to trust the phrase, but it appears that his distrust of his Maester is pre-existing that.
That's true.
I've never thought of the Maesters in this way until like just now, like, and it yeah. Thank you everyone. Thank you for putting me in this position.
You're welcome.
I've never thought of the Maesters as being part of that question that I guess ASOIAF does. Someone ask, is blood thicker than water? Right. Would the Maesters necessarily have to have more ties to their family, or would they be like Tyrion, in which they're like, my family's terrible, and I found better friends outside of it than I have from them?
And this is kind of tangential, but I think that's why R plus L equals J is going to work so well, is because the central question there is Jon Ned's son or is he Rhaegar's son? Does it matter who his parents really were, or does it matter who he was raised by? Like that's such a central part of it. So yeah, all these other stories, like with the Maesters, explore that. And actually, I wanted to bring up when we were talking about Whaleys or Waleys or whatever the heck his name is. Whaleys flowers. There's some theories out there that he is the son of Archmaester Walgrave, because Walgrave has a locket with a picture of a woman. Whaleys is the son of a Hightower girl and an Archmaester of the Citadel. And also his name's Whaleys, and then there's Walgrave, you know, Wallace and Walgrave. Anyway, and the fact that Walgrave is also connected to Crescent, like he remembers Crescent's name and keeps calling Pate Crescent. It'll just be interesting to see if we get any more of that about Walgrave in the next book, because he seems to be weirdly connected, potentially, to a lot of people.
Well, it may not just be weirdly connected, it's that the Maesters know each other. They were novices together. They learned stuff together. It's not necessarily an indication that they're all working together because they know each other. That's the point of the Citadel. It is all these people coming together to learn collectively. They're learning from each other. They're reading each other's stuffs. They were probably acolytes for some terrible archmaester together, and so they know each other. That doesn't mean they're working together in tandem to execute this large conspiracy theory. It just means it's just the nature of university, essentially.
They just all lived in the same dorm together, and they all partied together. But like we do see them partying together.
That's true.
Like, in A Feast for Crows, as we see Pate. Pate is with Alaris and the other dudes whose names I don't remember, and they're like out there drinking at the tavern. They're like, we going out. We gonna pick up girls,
get crunk and
whatever.
Yeah. Pay for Rosie. And,
do things that undergrads do.
You know, pay for sex.
Whoa.
So speaking of novices and Alaris and all that. Good segue. Sam just arrived at the Citadel. Doesn't seem like he has time to be a Maester. What do you think? Like, is he going to become a Maester? Is he going to do it?
If we had a 5-year gap.
As I alluded to before, if you're going to become a Maester, you have to get a chain all the way around your neck, and Sam is pretty fat. So it seems unlikely he's going to be able to do
That's
it soon.
That's a good point.
If we had a 5-year gap, so I think Sam is another one of those characters that, like, the 5-year gaps would have totally benefited because, in 5 years, like, I got my degree in 4 years, like, some people do 5 years.
Exactly.
Sam can get his degree in 4 or 5 years. Yeah. But RIP 5-year gap.
It makes you wonder, though, if he already scrapped the 5-year gap, why send Sam to the Citadel? He cannot become a Maester in the time.
There's clearly something that he's needed for down there, besides being a Maester. Because otherwise, why send him exactly, Matt? Yeah.
It seems to be connected to the reason he put in Pate as the... and the conspiracy with Jaqen and all that stuff that's going on. it seems like Sam's going to be involved with that somehow, which, as one of our other esteemed Maesters noticed, that it seems like Jaqen is trying to break into the Citadel in order to get Walgrave's key, which opens any door in the Citadel, while Sam is there at the same time interacting with him. So it seems like maybe some sort of heist is going to happen, and that's why Sam is there, not necessarily to learn anything, like in particular.
That's a good point. You got to wonder if maybe with the 5-year gap, Sam was just going to get his chains, but then, like, when Feast picks up, the Faceless Men put into action some sort of plan to do their heist movie. Yeah.
The Fast and the Furious, or because we have the Sam POVs in Feast for Crows, it could be the Feast and the Furious. But speaking of Feast for Crows, moving a bit from the whole like Maester thing and Citadel thing, but part of it is if George R. R. Martin is all about the human heart in conflict with itself, Sam goes to the Citadel and becomes a Maester because this is the thing that pisses off Randall Tarly the most.
True.
And so much of his Feast chapters revolve around his father and tackling those issues.
Yeah, true.
So it's like that, but also I guess you don't need to necessarily have gotten like, he doesn't need his diploma to like be of worth and know the things that he needs to know to help in the fight.
That's a good point.
Against the others.
Much like Kanye, he will be a college dropout.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did it. Full circle, everyone. We did it.
Oh my God, it's back to Kanye. Oh God, what have we done? But yeah, is there a specific piece of information, or, well, this is something to get into a little bit about the Citadel. They have this quote-unquote vault, the Citadel Vault. And this, Jaqen mentions this to Pate as there may be some kind of books in there that he's after. For an organization as old as the Citadel, and has been collecting knowledge and artifacts for as long as they still make Valyrian steel links. Somehow they're able to do that. So they have a source of that somewhere, obviously, in order to make them. What else? What could be in the Citadel vault that is important enough for George to send Sam and Jaqen H'ghar to the same place for? What do we think's in there?
I think it's Zarozo and Doxus from the show.
Oh no! there's a tunnel
from Karth to
Karth.
Yeah.
We do have a basis of there being tunnels going across everything in the world in the books.
You know, that's actually like
not out there.
Not being entirely serious, maybe, but you know, maybe it is something more like Bloodraven's Cavern or something like that. That's like an ancient seat of knowledge.
Yeah.
That's more tied to the Green Seers and all that kind of stuff. That's like deep beneath the earth, because we've seen the Hollow Hill and Bloodraven are both these caverns that are Weirwood related and the roots of knowledge and things like that. So maybe it's something along those lines.
Especially with how old, with how old the Citadel is. And there's a Weirwood there. There's a big Weirwood on the Isle of Ravens. Is there something Children of the Forest underneath the Citadel?
I wonder if it's knowledge that it's just like, we don't know what we don't know. So this is my personal like theory that like...
Go.
Okay, the Citadel / mostly the Citadel is going to burn. It's going to go up in flames, just like because they have so much knowledge there. It's like the burning of Alexandria. You know, who knows what we lost? Like, I don't know what I don't know. And we have like all these like things in the world of Ice and Fire where like the Citadel almost got burned like 2 times. 3rd time's the charm. Maybe we'll finally like blow it all up.
Yeah, exactly.
The Danes sacked it once.
It is true.
Yeah.
I think it was actually Samwell.
Yeah,
Dane,
the Savage.
Maybe.
Ooh.
Savage Sam, I think. Ooh.
Samwell Dane burning the Citadel.
Obviously, Alexandria, the comparison with the big lighthouse towering over everything.
Yeah.
Lighthouse, like I feel like that's definitely intentional. He's comparing it to Alexandria for us. He's like, hey, look look at what I'm doing.
But Michael, I understand that you have a theory about how Old Town might be destroyed.
Yes, I do, Matt.
Okay.
No, so
let's hear about this.
when I was in the room for the Forsaken reading and Eliana was there.
Woo.
Yeah, woo. Obviously, Euron, excuse me. Well, both of them are in the Red Wine Straits, sort of heading for Old Town-ish, although they're going to have to face the fleet first. And Euron seems to be preparing for some sort of blood sacrifice involving priests. He's lashed them to the masts of his ships and he's, sailing out.
Mm-hmm.
And then Melisandre has these visions, right, of the towers submerged beneath a black and bloody tide. And in Jojen's visions, the tide coming to Winterfell is a symbol for the Ironborn and black and bloody tide there. So I think Euron is going to commit some sort of mass magic atrocity by slitting all these throats into the sea and things like that, to either summon an eldritch abomination or just create a massive tidal wave, or call down a hell meteor or something, who knows, to destroy Old Town and sort of smash his way up into it. And that's, I think, what Melisandre is seeing in her visions. So I feel like that's what's on the table for Old Town in the Winds of Winter, is sort of a countdown to Euron's arrival and bringing what poor Quentin calls the Eldritch Apocalypse. And Sam's going to be on the front lines of that, obviously, standing right there.
I'm in.
I'm sold.
Hell yeah.
An interesting thing about that, if you tie it back into what we know about Peyton Jaqen, Sam may escape Old Town with the one piece of knowledge they need about the others, or the Children of the Forest, like a particular book, or there's all these other crazy books in there, what is it? Signs and Portents, which is the Rhaenys, the dreamer, who foretold the doom of Valyria. Or there's Septon Barth's about unnatural history, about the biology of dragons and all their lore and stuff like that. There's a lot of information that Sam could escape this eldritch horror with that would necessitate George to send him all the way from the Wall to Braavos and all the way down to Old Town
just
because
to pick it up.
Needs to get
exactly.
Just to pick it up. He needs that.
It'll tell us a lot about Sam, what he chooses, and he's like, this is what's important.
Yeah. Like if you were on a desert island and you had to save one book from the Citadel, what would you save?
And what if you're Sam and you don't know which ones are important?
The one with the nice pictures. That's what I would say.
The one that says A Song of Ice and Fire.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for today's episode of Maester Monthly. We've gone on long enough about all these topics. I've been one of your hosts, Bookshelf Stud.
And I'm Glass Table Girl.
And I'm Joe Magician.
And also thank you to Mighty Isabel, who was with us for most of the podcast. And thank you to our editors, Sam, a.k.a. Sam R., who just does an incredible job and did the music for the beginning, which is awesome. And Aaron, who takes care of the YouTube upload and also just is a very helpful person in making sure all of our recordings sound good. And most importantly, thank you to you, the users, the people who wrote all of this cool stuff, who brought up all these good ideas and made it possible for us to talk for so long about so many cool aspects of a series we all love. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.